Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Yeah. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Yeah. Here we go. You dial said correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted you're in class with us today. Broadcast 2 hours, Monday through Friday, from the Missouri Ozark Mountains. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Patrick is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. And Werner Bock is with us. Welcome, Werner.
Yeah, good morning, Vincent. Hope I'm ready
it's great.
Answer as many questions as you have.
Yeah, Werner, it's great to hear your voice. And I love talking with you and your wife on the phone. I enjoy our phone calls. Yeah. Werner, a couple of things are happening. John Statmiller spent some time here at the farm over the Christmas day and before and after. It was great to see him. And we're talking about cows. And he would get in the Jeep and we'd go visit a cow that had we had a stillborn. And, that's always traumatic for the mama cow. And while the cow's hip was broken during pulling the calf was dead. And we were talking about farmers and how, is there any profit in being a cattle farmer? And I said, no, there really isn't. And we talked about, people think all you do is you have one cow and you get two, and then pretty soon you have another cow, and then they breed and you have more and more cows, and pretty soon you're rich. But what they don't see is the side that John Statmiller saw of the life and death of the animals and the losses and how much time it takes and how you can't just leave them alone. I mean, if you've got them penned in to an area where they can't get out, you really have to take care of them, and you have to make sure that they're okay 24 hours a day. And he saw that side of it. And then to add to that, I had over Christmas, we had a visitor to the farm, a young lady who is studying agriculture. And she's a farmer. She's a farm gal. She's been a farm gal all her life. She's in her 20s. And I said to her, well, do you know, and she lives in Missouri near us, I said, do you know any farmer, any single farmer, where the spouse does not have a job outside the farm to help pay for the farm, meaning income to support still holding on to that farm? And she thought for a few seconds and she said, no, there's no farmer that she knows of that doesn't have an outside job to pay for the farm. And so the point I'm trying to make is, it may seem that farmers are just rolling in dough, rolling in money because they have land. However, that land is taxed, their house is taxed, the cows are taxed. I mean, there's the utilities, there's the insurance, there's the equipment, there's the fuel, on and on and on, the spare parts. Do you know of any farmers who can farm without having some kind of outside income today?
Not around here, except when you are, part of the smaller clique of some real big dairy farms that have been on the dough, on taxpayers' dough for a long while. But nonetheless, it takes a lot of work, a lot of hard work. by the whole family, still to keep the family together, to keep the farm together. And we are basically stewards of the land, and it is not being appreciated by the rest of the population.
Yeah,
I encountered that when I was farming in Germany. The first 10 years when I was farming in Germany, we were being portrayed as the welfare bumps of living of taxpayers' dough, and the sooner they could wipe out the majority of us farmers, the happier they were. But now the chicken are coming home to roost. They got more and more of those big mega farms that are farmed according to the agenda of the big chemical companies and their shareholders, And it reflects itself now in the health status of the population, and it reflects itself in the environmental damage. And we haven't seen nothing yet with this GMO farming and glyphosate and all the chemical minefields they have been creating. We haven't seen the full extent of the damage that has been done, not just only to the environment, but to ultimately it will to all life on this planet. It is not sustainable. And the ones that are still, promoting it are especially the ones that are profiting from the dividends that are being dished out by those big chemical companies. And they need more and more scientific horse for hire, to basically lie to the public and brainwash them that they are the ultimate solution of dealing the problems of feeding the people in this world, and dealing with the environmental problems. And the more those so-called scientists address the issue, the more damage they create. It's basically like the sorcerer's apprentices, In the end, all the ghosts that they have called, they can't get rid of them anymore. And the environmental damage will ultimately become so great that it leads to the ultimate destruction, And it would have been a lot better when right at the onset of their studies and before they got those high-paying positions of power, that they had to admit they know only very little the way everything is functioned in the creation.
Mm-hmm. Werner, in 2012, let me start this way. In 1974, the average age of a farmer in 1974 was about 50 years old. In 2012, it was 58 years old. So the average farmer is 58. Today, the statistics from 2014, the average farmer is 58.3 years old. I'm 65 as a farmer. So I guess I'm a little older than the average farmer. But, when you say, what's the age of the average mechanic? What's the age of the average computer professional? You'd find that the ages are much, much lower. So farmers are working pretty long into, darn close to retirement. And actually, the retirement years. However, I don't even think farmers can retire. I don't think it's possible, from my perspective, because where's the retirement? In order to retire, a farmer would have to sell the land. And it's an emotional thing. Heck, I every once in a while, Werner, I just take a walk, and I just spend a couple hours just walking around the fields and just looking and remembering back what they used to look like when we first bought the farm. It was run down. Now it looks pretty darn good. And, and I take stock in what we've done, what we've accomplished. And heck, I would not want to sell our farm. Really, after all that blood, sweat, and tears, sell the farm to retire? It's unthinkable.
Well,
but yet,
Vincent, once in a while, we have to stop and face reality. And basically, I started out here when I was 27 years old when I came here to Canada, and I dealt with the same situation. The land was run down, the woods had been plundered and everything, and I put my nose to the grindstone. And so many people, they just basically here, the northeast and the eastern part of Canada, they're basically the great welfare recipients from the rest of the country. And you got a similar situation in the New England states and some other areas on your side of the border, And when somebody puts his nose to the grindstone, and after a few years things start looking up, that's when the ugly head of envy raises. Envy raises its ugly head. And then we have to watch out, because there are so many people who had been loafing around in the countryside, living on welfare, living on unemployment, and figure that gravy train would never stop. And then they are envious when somebody gets something together, and we cannot expect any help whatsoever, what I've seen from all the government agencies that are supposed to protect us from those domestic predators. Our danger is not come from abroad. Our enemies, they are not come from abroad. They are living right within the community, and they are right well established in most of the government agencies, because their bread is buttered by corporate profits, their pension funds and their private investment portfolio, and they got no financial interest in the family farm and the farming family that hang on for dear life.
You were talking when we first started this broadcast about holding on to the farm by having one spouse working outside the farm, and then that would be for part of the day. The rest of the day, that spouse would come home and help out at the farm. But the other side of that is what you mentioned. Farmers are being subsidized. Some farmers, the ones who are connected, the ones who are tied to the big machine, to big government, to the county governments, the ones who somehow seem to get these government handouts that other farmers can't get. We'll be right back. Werner Bock's with us. Werner Bock's a farmer. Has been for decades in New Brunswick, Canada. And Bob in Maryland, welcome. You're on with Werner Bock and me. Bob? We lost Bob. I just saw.
Oh.
Yeah, we lost Bob. Just as I was welcoming him. I'd like to just say, yesterday I was not on the air. And what happened was I went into the studio early in the morning, and the phone didn't work. I dial tone, but any number I called was busy. And I looked at the internet, and it was down. So no phone, no landline, no internet, and we don't have a cell phone. So I thought, let me reset the router, let me check the lines, let me check all the connections. There's nothing I could do to fix it. And of course, I'd like to call the phone company and say, what gives? This is CenturyLink. It's like the worst phone company on the planet, as far as I can tell. And if I had stock in it, I would sell it, because it's miserable, absolutely miserable. And if I were to call it, they'd say, you can use our online service to report a problem. Really? How's that? How would you use the online service if you can't get online? And most of the time, it is an online service problem, or an internet problem. But I could not call GCN to say I can't broadcast because I don't have a phone. So Mrs. Finelli hopped in the vehicle and raced to a neighbor's house, probably a mile and a half away, who has a cell phone, and asked if she could call. And I couldn't even talk to Rick Miller to say that, hey, Rick, I can't do it today because I don't have a telephone. So she raced to a neighbor's house while I was still trying to connect. I couldn't, and so that's what happened yesterday. No phone, no landline, no internet, no broadcast. And I was also scheduled to be on with Dr. Bill Deagle yesterday to talk about what if the phone lines go down? What does that really mean? Well, I just described what it means. It means if the internet's down, the phone lines are down, there's no broadcasting. Which means, and here's what I do. And I just wanted to share this with the class for just a couple seconds. So all during the day, we have a computer in the kitchen of the farmhouse. And, we go in and out of the kitchen a lot. And I check the news, and I write myself an email. And I copy down all kinds of links about things I'd like to mention. Sometimes I mention them, sometimes I don't. But I might have 30 links, and I'll send that email. Well, I couldn't even do that. I couldn't even send myself the email. Even though I sent it the night before, I couldn't pick it up the morning of the broadcast because what? The internet was down. So I got to tell you that radio will be a whole different thing if the internet goes down. Everything will be local. All news will be local because we won't know what's going on outside of local. I can tell you who's getting married and who did their wash today, by hopping in the Jeep and looking around at the clothesline. I can tell you that, but not much more than that. Just wanted to let you know. So that's what happened yesterday. And CenturyTel lets me down regularly. They really do. Werner, are you finding that the average age of a farmer is getting older in your neck of the woods as well?
Well, every so often that happens, but not to the extent the way you describe it there in your neck of the woods.
Okay. So are you saying that farmers are not 60 years old? They're younger than that?
No, here the average age of the farmer is about in the same age range.
Okay.
And that's the reason why there's so much abandoned farmland around here. Mm-hmm. Because the farmers, they just got too old. They couldn't do it anymore. And what made me so angry over the last years when I realized how the farmers that were farm sustainable, with what kind of dirty tricks they were basically terminated with their farming.
When we come back, Werner Bock, let's talk about the dirty tricks against the farmer, the guy and the gal who work 24 hours a day. We'll talk about that. Werner Bock and I are discussing the crisis in family farming. And the reason I use the word crisis, when you think of the average farmer being about 60 years old, the average, you can see that this is not going to work out well. And Werner, what I've seen is, there are some farmers who have new equipment, new tractors, and some of us may be envious. Wow, look at that new John Deere tractor. How can they afford that? How can they afford that new baler? How can they, how do they do? What are they doing that we're not doing? And the answer is they're probably on the government dole, literally. They're probably on the government dole. And so when we want to drill a well, it's $10,000. If they want to drill a well, they find some government program, sign up for it, and the government will pay $7,500 of that well drilling. All they have to do is sign up for it and agree to a government contract. Well, we don't want to do that. So we do it the hard way. But and then some farmers say, you know what, I'd like a flat floor. That's the term they use around here in Missouri, a flat floor. What they really mean is a level playing surface. What they really mean is, it sure would be nice if we got rid of all the subsidies or give everybody the subsidies. But I think they'd rather have us get rid of all these subsidies so that the playing field is level, so that when we sell our cows and they sell their cows, there's the same kind of profit margin in them. But it's not, because they're subsidized and we're not. And farmers are a dying breed. And that's just the fact of the matter. Werner, we were talking about dirty tricks against farmers to steal their farms. Tell us about that, please.
Oh, there have been many dirty tricks I've uncovered over the last year in New Brunswick, but I was familiar with some of them over from the old country when I was farming there in the 60s, where government was handing out hidden grants to some farms, and the others, they were left out in the cold And we didn't want any grants, no. But the way the situation was over there in Germany was the German economy, they needed to export, and the main items of export were machinery, and they exported it to countries whose only payment was natural resources and farm products. And then there came another thing that was being thrown in, that was when any one of, like in North America or any other European countries, when they had to produce the surplus and they wanted to get rid of it, they heavily subsidized it and threw it on the market. And we couldn't compete with those subsidized imports, So many more farmers bit the dust. And it was a continuous racket. And I was growing sick and tired of it. In the first few years in the early 70s, when I came here to New Brunswick, there was I considered to be still a fairly even playing field. But then they adopted the same kind of dirty practices what they used over there in the old country in order to basically to thin out the number of farmers. And then I found out it was not the reason that so many farmers here had given up farming and abandoned the farmland that was reverting back to woodland and to wilderness. It wasn't that the people were lazy, but that already for decades earlier, dirty tricks were being played on the farmers. The farmers that were farmed organically here, most of the farmers, they were not familiar with the modern farm chemicals. And I was familiar with some of those chemicals from the old countries, and I went to agriculture college, so I was well familiar with. And within a few years, I found out that they had been sabotaged, the farmers, with different type of chemicals, long-term soil sterilant, selective herbicides, and anything to ruin their crop potential. And sooner or later, the farmers ran out of money, And then the government, they told them, you have to plow up your hay ground every 3 or 4 years if you want to get a good hay crop. And that was basically disproven by long-term trials, for example, at the Napa Research Station in Nova Scotia, where they used the hay ground for over 80 years. They made an 80-year-long Greenland trial, and there was no need of plowing up your hay ground every few years. If you fertilized it with, and the most advantageous was the way the old farmers were doing, when every 3 or 4 years they would put a good coat of manure on, and the hay ground became more productive, and stayed productive. And it came on, thumbs up compared to the chemical way of farming, But this was not being told to the farmers. And as I say, first few years, the old farmers I encountered, they were decent, hard-working people. And then I noticed that most of them, they had to quit because of health problems. And the main health problems were heart disease and cancer. And this is what I documented in some of my own research I did when I encountered the killing of my livestock. And when I started doing autopsies, and I documented the damage to the internal organs, and it paralleled the very same damage and health problems that occurred my neighbors and led many of them to an early death. So I realized it wasn't just only a naturally occurring health problem, but it was basically organized crime that were trying to get the farmers out by hook and by crook. The traditional farmers that weren't feeding enough money into the pockets of the business community and or into the pockets of the big multinational corporations, the machinery companies, and the chemical companies. But and I've been now in a battle now for over 42 years, and they threw anything at me, what they could throw at me in order to shut me up, from false accusations, put me in the loony bin and everything, and slandering me. But just only from 2011 until 2014, they dragged me through courts, through false accusations, and I fought back. I didn't use a lawyer. I defended myself. I did my homework. And in the end, they had to back off. Not before they tried to put me away permanently for the rest of my life into a mental institution. But it didn't work either. And that's when I found out about the whole racket that's going on. Anybody who speaks out against this corrupt system, they have psychiatric horse for hire that ultimately want to shut people up. And most of those psychiatrists that are practicing here, all the ones I encountered, they came from third world countries, third world hellholes. And it is very preferable, when they hear they can drive a BMW, than being sent back, for example, to Nigeria, to Bangladesh, to Pakistan, to India, and to one of the, Dominican Republic, or some of those hellholes.
Wow. So, Werner, you and I have talked off the air. Do you want to talk about they actually forced you into a mental institution for a little bit? What was that like? Why did they do it?
That was this was in 1975. I was well established. I had a nice herd of beef cattle. And for the next few years, I wanted to, do more basic infrastructure work on the farm, like drain the field and clean up the fields that had been basically grown over by all the bushes and that had become unproductive, and lime the ground and basically get the yield potential up to snuff again, And then suddenly cattle, they started dying, and very suspicious circumstances, and I found out too much. But I didn't get any help from any kind of a government agencies, neither from the police nor from the Department of Agriculture, only massive cover-up, because I'd stumbled upon this big Watergate, And then one of the perpetrators who was involved in killing my livestock, he was a buddy that ran with the Mounties, some other neighbors told me about, and he made up a false accusation that I threatened him with a gun, I was being picked up and put in the loony bin, and for about 5.5 weeks. And wow. I wanted to find out, when under the Freedom of Information Act, I requested my files, and the reason why I was being picked up were being blacked out. But he was listed as a complainant. And then I found out about a year and a half earlier. They had pulled off the same stunt on another farm, just only 70 miles away. 65 head of cattle had been killed within a couple of months or so on his farm. He had a well-run dairy farm. I was familiar with his farm because in 1969 I picked up my combine from his place, and I didn't get it ready for the road that afternoon. So I stayed there overnight, and it was a well-run dairy farm. And as I say, in 1973 he encountered the same kind of problem, same kind of cover-up. He was being picked up. He had a well-known lawyer and mayor of Moncton. As he's representing him in court, he had sued some people about the death of the cattle, but the case got thrown out of court. The next morning, police picked him up and put him in the loony bin. And he was assigned to the same young immigrant doctor from Bangladesh who barely spoke English, supposed to be suffering from paranoia. This is basically the standard procedure to shut people up. And then once they get you in the system, they try to drug you up and basically destroy your mind.
We have an instructor. We have an instructor by the name of Mark Baker, and his farm is called Baker's Green Acres.
Yeah.
And he was raising some. Did you hear what I said? Do you know about Mark Baker?
The name sounds somewhere familiar. I might have read something up on the internet there a while ago.
Yeah, he raised pigs in Michigan, and the Department of Natural Resources came down on him, told him he had to kill his pigs, and he fought him, and he won. He's one of our instructors. Same kind of thing. We'll be right back. We'll be right back. Talking with Werner Bock. He's a farmer for decades. And I was telling you about another one of our instructors. And he had Mark Baker in Michigan. He has a farm, and he raises pigs. And the Michigan DNR, Department of Natural Resources, came down on him and said he had to kill his pigs. And he said no, and they threatened him. And to make a very long story short, they said, well, your pigs are wild, and if they get out, it poses a threat. And he wanted to know, how do you define a wild pig? And they said, well, if he has a curly tail or a straight tail. And that's all the pigs. That's all of them. They all have either curly or straight tails. And, these bozos who work for the Department of Natural Resources, they're parasites. And they really, really came down on him and made his life miserable. Well, he's one of our instructors, and a bunch of us drove up to meet with him. And he took a page out of our book. And what he did was he decided that he would do what we do, make sure all the people who are these criminals get all the credit they deserve. Now I'm talking about white-collar, government-sanctioned, bred criminals. These people are bred to be criminals, right? They want a piece of your wallet. They want your farm. They want whatever you have. They want it. And so he decided that he would make them all famous. And he went on YouTube and he held up their business card, read their names, who they were, gave out their phone numbers, and eventually he won. He won. So that class, those are the tactics that I use when I was threatened by the state of Missouri. They wanted me to pay $100,000 in unpaid sales tax. That was absolutely bogus. It's hard to believe that, when I tell you that they came after me and my family, and they threatened us with liens, and I gave out their names, their phone numbers. I told you who they were, the chief legal counsel for those thugs. Yeah. I gave out their information, and you know what? They sent me 2 letters of apology. One was from the director, and one was from the chief legal counsel. Oh, I'm paraphrasing. Oh, most so sorry. Wrong guy. Most so sorry for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. These guys threatened us with the full force of the state of Missouri, stealing our farm, stealing our property. That's what these parasites wanted to do. That's what they wanted to do to Mark Baker.
It's organized crime. And
it is organized crime.
Into the highest places of the government, and they are basically running the government. And last night I came across a website about, I don't know, it might be worthwhile to Google him up, John Bosnitz. He is a journalist, and he has been working at an international level, and he exposed a lot. We have to see the bigger picture and how far the organized crime is spread and how much death and destruction they have caused right across this planet, and they got the militaries as their heavy boot to do that dirty bidding. And it's like, look what you did there about exposing. This is what during the Middle Ages people in communities were doing when somebody had offended against the community. They took the law into their own hand, and anybody who committed a serious offense against the community, they didn't want to get their heads chopped off. But they had to be displayed in an iron cage in the middle of the marketplace, for a day, for 2, or whatever the sentence was, to shame them. And I think the same we should, and what you have done, expose the one, name their names and everything. And I did that to an extent too, when I went to the internet and I posted comments and everything, and I went over the head of the perpetrators, and then some of them in the media, they got fired. And some of them in the government organizations, from the SPCA to the Department of Agriculture, they got kicked out, or they took early retirement.
Good for you. And the newspaper, when I lived in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the editor would write articles about this guy, and they gave him a name. They spelled it F-I-R-E-M, Farem, and that was me. Because I would say, what would I do? What would you do? We'd fire him. Werner, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Everyone all set?
Hello.
Cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. For those of you new to the broadcast, there are over 200 of us here at USA Prepares, and experts in all kinds of areas. We're innovators, we're dentists, medical doctors, engineers, surgeons, CEOs, broadcasters, editors, authors, physicists, programmers. Most of us can't hold down a job. And I'm delighted, because we don't take direction very well, I'm delighted to introduce to you your newest instructor, Dr. Timothy Schoechle. He's an international consultant in computer and communications engineering and policy. He works on technical standards for the home and building networks and controls related to solar energy, particularly to adding batteries to photovoltaic systems. He works on technical and policy issues related to broadband fiber networks and the Internet of Things. He's a PhD in communications policy, and he served on the faculty of the University of Colorado and Colorado State University. Welcome, Dr. Tim Schoechle.
Thank you, Vincent.
And it's great having you as an instructor. And today we're going to be talking about several areas, and one of them is, we can start with the transformation of energy technology from centralized and capital intensive to distributed in smaller areas. And you know, when you think about this, it's kind of like the factory farm. The factory farm where you have hundreds of thousands of birds laying eggs compared to small farms where you have free-range chickens. And in the big factory farms, you have an enormous amount of waste, an enormous amount of smell, and potential for enormous amounts of pollution compared to the smaller free-range chickens farms where the manure doesn't smell, the chickens don't smell, and they fertilize the area where they live. And it works out really well. Can you share with us, Dr. Tim Schoechle, what your thoughts are on this transformation from centralized to distributed energy?
Well, I'll give it a stab here. The history of electricity, we have to remember, is only 130 years old. I mean, it's not been around that long, but for most of that time, until just a few years ago, it was extremely capital intensive. It took a lot of money to build the big generation and transmission systems. Basically, the way it's organized is there's generation, transmission, distribution, and the customer. The generators were usually originally coal and hydro and nuclear. The transmission lines, high voltage lines that you've seen around, and then the distribution lines in your streets and alleys that go to the actual homes and businesses. Those are the three elements, and all of that was very expensive. So it was an infrastructure that took a lot of money. So Thomas Edison and people like George Westinghouse that started the industry and started the technology, basically developed these alliances with banks, and particularly J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison. And they formed a company called Edison General Electric. That's one of the big companies of that time. Well, the transformation that's going on right now is with solar energy, particularly photovoltaics, and the stuff that goes with it, like the electronic inverters and the batteries and things like that, are getting so cheap they're becoming commodities. So there's a transformation that's taking place from this centralized, capital-intensive system to the distributed consumer electronic commodity system. It's a gradual transition, but we can see it all around us, and the dramatic drop in the price of solar panels and batteries make it practical to distribute this, and for each of the customers to actually generate a lot of their own power economically, and getting to the point where we just ultimately may not need the centralized generation and transmission facilities anymore, and just rely on the wires and poles and a community-based energy system where we all generate our power within the community. That's entirely possible in some places it's already being done.
You know, I mentioned to you off the air, I ran for the board of directors for a local electric cooperative, and that was exactly one of the things that I was proposing, that we have, people like us who have a farm, and we have a solar array, and, maybe we just can't use all the electricity we generate. We can put some into the battery bank, and we still might have some left over on these bright, sunny days. And, well, if we could physically disconnect our part of the grid, 35,000 customers that we have on this particular utility, if we could disconnect from the grid, which we can, just by throwing some switches, and if there were an EMP and we'd want to disconnect, well, if we had some available excess from guys that have built and gals who have built, these solar arrays, we could put it back on our smaller grid and have like a large village cooperative power, separate from the power generation of the big nuclear, the big coal, and the big hydros. And it could be done. I talked to the CEO about it, but people thought I was nuts. Now, I'm agreeing with you.
Well, the technology
I'm agreeing with you,
is just
because I proposed this.
Yeah. Well, that's the way a lot of developing countries are going. And we would like
sure,
to
and it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Elon Musk was out there and he unrolled some flexible solar panels and he was powering a hospital. But doesn't this really mean, if we want to have distributed electricity, doesn't it really mean one of the first things that we have to do is reduce our consumption? Isn't that part of this?
Well, that's part of it, yeah, because every watt that you can save is a watt you don't have to generate or store. And then the technology for generating and storing it becomes even cheaper. So the basic idea here is that, well, particularly with solar energy. Now, a lot of the things I was talking about apply to wind as well, but solar is particularly good because except that it doesn't generate it during the night, so you have to store it somehow. The biggest problem with solar is that it only is when the sun shines. But if with the proper storage or adequate amount of storage and economy, as you suggest, or efficiency, you can meet your needs or meet the community's needs by both storing it part of the time and then trading it between other members of the community during both on and off time.
Dr. Schoechle, one of the things that we've made a claim here at USA Prepares, and we believe that we are the first transcontinental powered by the sun broadcast. What I'm saying is I'm broadcasting via solar right now, and in my studio at our farm. Well, Gwyneth Isaacs is one of our instructors, and she's in Australia. And she lives on a farm, and she's totally off the grid there. And so she will broadcast via the sun. So I think we're the first, and we've been doing this for quite a while, experimenting with solar. And you're absolutely right. The tough one, the toughest part of all of this is the batteries, the expense of the batteries, and having the battery bank be large enough. And then how do you have this battery bank that's large enough and it will last long enough to make it viable? And as we talk about distributed electricity, we also need to talk about shifting the load. So, for example, let's say I built a little switch in our kitchen. Actually, it's 6 switches. One of our instructors said, hey, you can use a standard 20-amp three-way switch, the kind that you might have in a hallway where you can flip the switch on one end of the hallway, the light comes on, and as you exit the other end of the hall, you can flip that switch and the light goes off. So these are really common switches. Well, I employed that technology, that simplicity, in our kitchen. I have 6 switches. So on those switches, I can switch between on-grid and off-grid for certain circuits. So if Mrs. Finelli, my wife, wants to wash clothes and it's not a sunny day, she flips the switch to on-grid. If she wants to power that washing machine via the sun, she flips it to the solar side. So it's either an up or down switch. And these are switches that are like $1.50 or $2 a piece. And what I'm trying to say is we can do the same thing with our dishwasher. We can do the same thing with a lot of these appliances, except for it's not practical for a hot water heater, and it's not practical for a toaster, typically, to run that on solar. So we'd have to shift what we do with the generation of electricity, because it's easy to generate electricity. It's hard to store it. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Well, let's say the storage is going to be the more expensive element. So I'd say the cost of a solar a battery-equipped solar system, and I'm not talking about an off-grid system. There's three kinds of solar plus storage. There's on-grid, grid-tied all the time. There's off-grid, and then there's grid-connected but with battery backup. So the battery just becomes like a booster, and if the grid goes down, the battery then can take over.
And what we have is that hybrid system. And actually, we can be on-grid, off-grid, or grid-tied, or hybrid. And we can just, at the selection of a software switch, we can select among them. And the problem we have right now is if I want to do some welding on a dark day, oh boy, we might need the grid for that. Dr. Tim Schoechle is with us, and we're talking about decentralized power generation, electricity. And Dr. Schoechle, I mentioned on this broadcast that 3 years ago, I ran for the board of directors of a local power company, and my plan was to protect the power grid from an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. And there are ways that we could do that. And I was on stage in front of the attendees at the annual board of directors meeting, and people laughed at me. So I lost that election. And then I challenged, 3 years later, last August, I challenged the incumbents again on the board. There are 9 incumbents. And I said, well, my plan is to reduce our electric bills with decentralized power generation, exactly what you're talking about. And they laughed at me again. Now, it seems, and my family thinks I'm nuts. Dad, why are you doing this? Why are you wasting your time? There are a bunch of bozos that just don't get it. Why are you doing this? And I thought it was the right thing to do, and I may do it again. I don't know. Depends on how much time I'm willing to waste. But it is clear that decentralized is the way to go. But we are bucking, that's spelled with a B, those who have financial gain. The large corporations that have financial gain in mind, we are challenging them with this decentralization. And they don't want to lose their position in life. These mega paychecks. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, absolutely. That's one of the biggest barriers. That as I said, it was a very capital-intensive industry for 100 years or over a century, and so you built up a huge financial interest in this through the banks and the big utility companies, and over 60% of the power in the United States is generated by investor-owned utilities. And that's been a very good investment for the years because they're guaranteed the monopoly rates and by local regulators. But what this new movement toward the economics of distributed generation is challenging that, and it's creating a lot of turmoil because people have the option of buying their own systems. And we have a new term that's entered the vocabulary, the prosumer. That means the concept that every consumer of electricity could also be a potential producer. So the new word is prosumer, producer, consumer. And community power, where if you are using, you're still connected to the grid, but you're not depending on power coming into the grid from outside. You're just sharing it with your neighbors. It becomes a community effort, and this is challenging the model. The IOU, I said the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, have 60% of the market. The other is really co-ops like you're referring to, are municipal power companies, but a lot of them are also heavily invested in the out-of-date technology, the old technologies. And when they do want to get solar, they try to make it look like the centralized grid that they're used to, which is large solar farms and wind farms. And, that's better than using coal, I suppose. But it's not going to really deal with the basic issue, because in a minute we'll talk further about the other benefits of having that localized control over your power, such as resiliency. But the dependency on big corporations and institutions is becoming a major issue, in political issue. People just don't like getting jerked around by these companies.
Mm-hmm. As you're saying this, I'm thinking about the four directions of the compass: north, south, east, and west. And in the United States, south is where you'd want to point your solar panels. Well, I'm thinking that if there are four directions, there are probably 1/4 of the roofs in the United States that are facing south. 1/4 of them. So if we wanted to put solar panels up, there we go. We've got pretty darn close to an okay angle aimed at the south in 1/4 of the homes. Heck, this doesn't seem like it's a monumental task to convince people that they can do this.
Yeah, well, they can.
All we need to have is
they can put the ground mount solar in their backyard or in their carport or some other places on their property as well.
There you go, and that's for the other 3/4 of the roofs that aren't facing south. Dr. Schoechle and I'll be right back right after these few short commercial announcements. Class, I'd like to thank USA Preparedness instructor Katie Singer for introducing me to Dr. Tim Schoechle. Katie called me and she said, you need to talk to Tim Schoechle and have him on the air. And Katie, thank you so much. Dr. Schoechle, as we look at climate change, we used to call it global warming, but now we realize that it's violent climate change and not just global warming. There's swings in both directions. How does that impact the new energy economy? Well,
that brings up a subject that I would call resiliency and sustainability. Those are the terms that we use now. I'll give you an example. The way that solar PV systems, photovoltaic systems, worked in the past for many years is that you put solar panels on your roof, you buy an inverter, and then you just plug it in, and it feeds power back to the grid when the sun's shining. And when the sun at night, you just draw power from the grid. So that's called net metering, and you're just paying for you're getting paid back at the same price as you're buying it for, basically, because it's running the meter backwards when it's producing power and feeding it to the grid. The only problem with that is when the grid fails, as it did in New Jersey in Superstorm Sandy. New Jersey has one of the highest penetrations of solar PV in the United States. But when they were hit with this storm, most of those systems did not work. In other words, the people living there, the power grid was just damaged heavily throughout that area, but they couldn't use their solar panels because the systems weren't designed to allow them to use that power at all. It was only designed to be fed into the power grid. So if there's no grid, then you got no power. Well, if you put a battery with the system and you use some of these new electronic inverters and switches, smart switches that you were referring to earlier, you can have the system automatically switch off of the grid onto the battery system. You were talking about how you flip the light switch to change which circuits are being powered. Well, these very smart electronic switches are built into these inverters. They can switch a circuit without interruption. So, the power is in an AC power system, the power is reversing 60 times a second. Well, what it does is it waits till it's reversing when there's zero voltage, and it flips the switch quickly, sort of without you even knowing it, and switches the circuit. So you would wire your house a little bit differently. You might have separate that house into the normal main electric panel loads, and you might then have a priority load switch panel or circuit breaker panel that where in the priority load panel would involve your refrigeration and communication and vital things like that you would want to have operating even when the power grid is off. And then you'd have other things like a lot of your lighting or water heaters and things like that hooked to the main panel. And the system would be smart enough to switch when it needed to. The other benefit to that is that these systems, these new inverters, are smart enough to help the local grid synchronize its frequency and voltage, so that when a cloud comes across the sky, there's a dip in the power, a little bit in the power production in the neighborhood. The thing can squirt a little electricity into the grid from the battery, just a little bit, and that will smooth it out. It will enable a much smoother, localized power generation, and also make the community more independent of the main big power grid. So, the more of that, it allows a much higher penetration of solar energy. It can achieve penetrations normally. If you get more than about 10 to 15% of the power in a given feeder or circuit off of a substation in a neighborhood, over about 15 to 20% of that is solar, then you have a stability issue if there's fluctuations in the solar generation. But if you have these smart systems with batteries that can back up the neighborhood, whether it's located in your house or maybe a community battery sitting at one of the substations or somewhere down the street, then you can get the solar penetration up to well over half, or even 30 to 50% with the present technology. And the further we go, the better that will get. So, in dealing with climate change, we're going to see a lot more storms. We're seeing fires. We're seeing all these things happening. And we're going to see more of it. And so this increase in the resiliency, this is what we call resiliency, the ability to essentially use your own solar power, whether or not the grid is working, and also for your neighborhood to be able to do that too. So that's one of the responses, and toward a more sustainable, long-term sustainable system.
I was advocating this, and as I was greeting people in the lobby for the evening's election or selection of the board of directors, somebody said to me, "Okay, like smart Alec, how do you actually propose that this system would work?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of easy. Those of us with solar panels can feed our excess electricity to the grid and be compensated for it. Right now we're paying 5.4 cents per kilowatt hour wholesale, and the utility is selling it at about 10 cents per kilowatt, doubling the price." And I said, wouldn't it be nice if the utility were to pay us half of that, like 2 cents or 2.5 cents?
Yeah.
We'd be happy. The customers would be happy. The bills would be lower. We would have more electricity assurance that it would be there. It'd be a more stable platform. And if the electric cooperative would incentivize and teach and educate a lot of the farmers around here who have the real estate to put these solar arrays up, I think it would work. And, it still goes laughed at. The problem is, that's not the way we do it. We haven't done it that way. Why should we change? Well, I think we should change because of the things like Superstorm Sandy that, heck, it knocked out water. It knocked out electricity. It was a really big problem for a lot of people. It was horrific. and I'm with you. But the powers that be are really digging their heels in. They literally, how much do they want to prevent other voices from educating people? Well, they only allowed me 2 minutes on stage, literally 2 minutes, to communicate to thousands of people the message that we're talking about here for an hour. And it's impossible, especially when they're digging in. They're saying, "Listen, I'd rather hear the band play tonight rather than hear Vin Finelli talk about sustainability and protecting the grid and lower electric bills. Give me some more hot dogs, popcorn. Rather have some of those cans of soda and potato chips and the band. That's why I'm here." It's tough. It really is tough to convince the masses that for their own good they ought to pay attention, at least for a little bit. And are you seeing this, or is this just me?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of, you got to remember that a lot of these utilities, whether they're investor-owned utilities, the big ones, or whether they're the co-ops and REAs and rural electric associations or even municipal power companies, they have been in business a long time, and they have committed to long-term contracts to buy power, a lot of it coal-generated, and it's a traumatic issue for them, to switch over. They're stuck with a lot of these power companies are like the municipal utility in Fort Collins here in Colorado is heavily, and they'd like to switch, and all the people that live there would like to switch to renewable energy. But the problem is they heavily invested in coal. They even own a coal mine in western Colorado that they've got to figure out how to get out of. But this, what you're doing, I think, in moving to try to play a new role in your local co-op is exactly the topic of a new book that I just got that in fact Katie Singer pointed me to, was Energy Democracy, Advancing Equity and Clean Energy Solutions. And it's a lot of case studies around the country of power companies, many of them municipal or rural electric associations, that are very stuck in this rut, and it's about case studies about how people were able to go in and take over some of those and make them more democratic. And the title again is Energy Democracy: Advancing Equity and Clean Energy Solutions. I highly recommend it. It's just published this year by Denise Fairchild and Al Weinrub, and there are cases all over the United States.
I'm going to see if I can contact them and get some more information, get the book, read the book, and see if we can have them on the air as well. Because I think it's important that we do decentralize. And all of the things that you said, I totally agree with. However, the customer is really not paying attention. They pay attention when the electricity stops, but they don't pay attention while everything is working fine. And they take it for granted. And our utility keeps raising its prices. It has had 7 price increases in 14 years. And I've even tried the argument with, well, let's lower the electric bill. And they go, well, you know what? I'm okay with the electric bill. I like it right where it is. I mean,
that's great.
And it's a real tough argument. And the only thing I could come up with was, okay, so you go to the store and it's on sale, and you go, you know what? I'm not going to buy it right now because it's on sale. I'm going to wait till it goes to full price. Really, they don't want a better value? That's what they're saying. They're okay with the way it is. They don't want more energy security. They don't want lower bills. This is really a tough nut to crack. And my problem was I went head-to-head with trying to dethrone the chairman of the board. I need to pick on someone lower than that next time. We'll be right back. Dr. Tim Schoechle is with us. Dr. Schoechle, I just found the book Energy Democracy: Advancing Equity in Clean Energy Solutions. Denise Fairchild and Al Weinrub. Do you have their contact information that you could give me off the air?
I'm sorry, I don't. But
Okay.
I'd like to. I will look it up myself too. I'm just really intrigued with the book.
Okay. If I find it, I will forward it to you and to Katie. And if you guys find it, it'd be great if you could share it with me, and we can all work on this project. So here's my question. So let's say in the electric cooperative that I'm a member of, there are 35,000 customers. Let's say we were really, really successful in producing PV or photovoltaic power. Let's say we got 10,000 of us all on board, and we're contributing to producing power for our own member-owned, not investor-owned, but we are a member-owned electric cooperative. So it's in our interest to protect our interests. So let's say we get 10,000 of us all doing this. Is there a downside? I can't think of one. Can you think of a downside to us doing this?
I don't. I can't. I think not just is there no downside. We're all used to flipping the switch and having the light come on, and the power company somewhere does something we don't know or understand, and that's very easy. So I guess you'd say the downside is you got to think about it, and you got to understand what you're a little bit better, what you're so dependent on. That's the downside. You got to educate yourself a little bit. It's not as easy as just flipping the switch anymore. But on the other hand, there's other benefits that we didn't even mention, and there's icing on the cake. I would bring up the issue of community broadband and fiber. There's a couple of good examples of electric utilities that did that. There's Chattanooga, Tennessee has their own city owns the electric system there, and they a few years ago they decided, well, we have to run optical fiber, high-speed communications around the town to help control our power grid anyway. Why don't we just run it to everybody's house and provide everybody in the city with access to super high-speed Internet access? Well, they did that, and they can supply 1 gigabit per second to every subscriber at a very reasonable price, along with their electricity, and it's resulted in a huge economic boom for economic development for Chattanooga. Exactly the same thing happened last year here in Colorado, in Longmont, Colorado, a neighboring town to where I live. Has its own electric company. It's a municipally owned electric utility. They're also working on solar energy, but they had the opportunity to go ahead and run optical fiber all over the town in preparation for a lot of that, and they supply for $49 a month. They supply 1 gigabit Internet access to everybody that wants it, and it's a symmetrical service, so that it means the upload and download speeds are a gigabit. They're all the same, and it's not like you're just watching videos on your Comcast cable. It's like you have the ability to actually host a server of your own. If you want to start a business in your house or do business from your home, you have just as good access as anybody, even a big company. So that's also the economic benefit of that is starting to be felt here too. And my city, the city of Boulder, would plan to do that in the next couple of years. And Fort Collins up the road here has just passed a ballot issue to bond that type of a system. So that's the icing on the cake. It makes the electricity run better, and even more renewable energy can go into the grid by connecting with the control systems in everybody's house, everybody's smart solar systems, and plus you get good, fast, cheap Internet access. That's awesome. And class, Dr. Richard Allen Miller, one of our instructors, was in Chattanooga also a couple of years ago teaching about permaculture and sustainable agriculture. So Chattanooga is the city to watch. Dr. Schoechle, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing information. We'll have to do this again and again and again.